There's a certain sound a silk blouse makes when it's ripped too fast, a sharp, desperate sound like a rat caught in a trap. I heard it the moment I stepped into the house that afternoon, carrying a dry-cleaning bag full of her perfectly pressed suits. Odd, because Claire never wore silk at home. Silk is for war rooms and courtrooms, she always said, brushing past me with that tired queen energy she wore so well. I froze by the door, keys still dangling from my fingers, listening to the unnatural hush that followed, punctuated by the faintest, unmistakable sound, someone hastily buttoning up a shirt in the guest bathroom we never used. I didn't barge in. I didn't call out her name like some simpering idiot in a bad sitcom. Instead, I turned slowly toward the kitchen, where her laptop sat open on the marble island, abandoned mid-email, looking forward to celebrating the promotion, winky face, Z. My eyes caught on the sender's name, and my stomach did a slow, methodical turn, not from nausea but from the exhilarating clarity that hits you when the mask finally falls and you realize you were never insane, just far too polite. Z, short for Zachary Monroe, the barely legal junior associate she always tutored after hours, claiming he needed special mentorship to survive the brutal world of corporate litigation. My hands didn't tremble as I moved closer, reading more. Threads of cheap flirting, promises of secret celebrations, nights spent reviewing briefs at hotels she insisted were just for out-of-town clients. It was all there, the whole grubby, desperate affair, playing out in full color betrayal less than 6 feet from the fridge where we kept our wedding cake topper. I closed the laptop quietly, thumb pressed gently against the screen so it wouldn't snap shut too loudly, and stood there for a moment, breathing in the sterile air of the life we'd built, the life she thought was so invincible, so bulletproof. She didn't even bother hiding the evidence anymore. Behind me, I heard the clumsy thump of someone knocking over a lotion bottle in the bathroom, followed by frantic whispering. Probably trying to fix themselves up, like a couple of teenagers sneaking around behind the gymnasium bleachers. I let them stew in the panic and sweat of their own making while I casually dropped my keys onto the counter and picked up the dry cleaning bag again, running a finger over the thin plastic protecting her armor, the pristine suit she thought made her untouchable. The irony tasted sweet. She was 2 days away from being named partner at Carmichael & Rowe, the youngest female partner in the firm's 130-year history. It was all she ever talked about anymore. The historic moment, the press release she had already secretly drafted, the champagne dinner she planned to throw at the Four Seasons where she would thank me, publicly, for my unwavering support. I smiled, not the smile she knew, but the private, razor-edged grin of a man who just realized the war was over before she even knew a battle had begun. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't accuse. I wouldn't even give her the dignity of a confrontation. No, Claire wasn't going to lose me. She was going to lose everything else. I listened to the click of the bathroom door creaking open, the faint footfalls of 2 guilty souls preparing to deliver a slurry of weak lies and poor improvisations, and I savored the slow, burning certainty rising in my chest. The certainty that by the end of this, her world would be ashes, and she would have no one to blame but herself. Claire always had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when she was bored out of her mind, scrolling through her phone under the table. It was one of the things I loved about her, that laser-focused charm she turned on like a spotlight, a skill that made her lethal in courtrooms and cocktail parties alike. For years, I thought that light was just for me. And for a while, maybe it was. We lived a good life, a polished, effortless kind of existence that felt safe even in its occasional mundaneness. Dinner reservations at places with words like artisan and sustainable in their names. Sunday mornings spent half-dressed and barefoot in our kitchen making French press coffee and reading each other tidbits from the Times. I bought her flowers without needing a reason. She kissed me goodbye every morning, still tasting faintly of mint and ambition. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it worked until it didn't. The first crack was almost laughable in how small it was. Claire decided she needed space in the closet. Not just a little half. Half the closet, reorganized, with my things quietly nudged out into the guest room. I'm streamlining, she said, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. Decluttering. Mental health, you know. And I nodded like a fool, because what else do you do when the woman you love says the problem is a few too many ties or shirts you don't wear anymore? I gave her space. I gave her more than she asked for. I didn't even flinch when she started taking solo weekends. 2, then 3, and then practically every month, disappearing to wellness retreats or girls' trips that somehow never resulted in any photos. any souvenirs, any stories beyond vague mentions of yoga classes and reconnecting with myself. I told myself it was healthy. I told myself I trusted her. And for a time, I believed it. Even when her phone started living face down on every surface. Even when her texts became suspiciously clean, wiped free of anything older than a few days. Even when I found a hotel keycard wedged between the passenger seat and center console of her car, a Marriott, 2 towns over, and she laughed, genuinely laughed, at my face when I showed it to her, brushing it off with a kiss and a "God, babe, you're so paranoid. That's from my last conference." Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I didn't push. I didn't want to be the kind of man who policed his wife's every move. Claire was evolving. She told me, her voice all soft edges and self-help jargon. She was finding herself again. She needed healthier boundaries, time to breathe, new goals that didn't revolve around being someone's wife. And I smiled. I cheered her on. I told myself that strong couples survive these phases, that marriage was about supporting your partner, not chaining them down. Still, the smile she offered me started to feel off. Too polished. Too polite. Like I was a colleague she barely tolerated at a networking event, someone useful for now, but disposable in the long run. There was a brittleness to her affection, a mechanical quality to our conversations. She didn't ask about my day anymore, didn't curl into me on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and bad TV shows. She wasn't cruel. No screaming matches, no dramatic accusations, but the distance between us stretched thin and cold, like a hairline crack in glass you only see when the light hits it wrong. I noticed she stopped wearing the gold necklace I gave her on our 3rd anniversary, the one she used to say made her feel lucky, like a talisman. It just vanished one day, no explanation, like a memory erased. Her wardrobe shifted too. Out went the elegant, strategic power suits, and in came something younger, edgier, designed less for command and more for conquest. She started talking about new opportunities, new networks, new faces that I never met, but heard about constantly. Zach this, Marcy that, a blur of names that didn't include me. I told myself it was normal, the price of ambition, of marrying a woman who was destined for more than PDA meetings and Costco runs. But some nights, too many nights, I would wake up alone, the space beside me cool and undisturbed, and find her downstairs in the dark, staring into her phone, smiling that secret, private smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. When I asked if she was coming to bed, she'd glance up like she'd forgotten I existed and say something vague. Soon, babe, just finishing an email, just 5 more minutes. But the 5 minutes would stretch until dawn. I didn't fight it. I couldn't. I clung to the hope that this was just a rough patch, that the woman I married was still in there somewhere under all the ambition, the self-help, the hunger for something I no longer understood. But deep down, in the parts of myself I didn't like to acknowledge, I knew. I knew I was standing on a bridge that was already burning, and she was the one holding the match. It was a Thursday night, the kind where nothing should happen, the kind where life is supposed to blur into the comfort of routine, Chinese takeout containers on the kitchen counter, and soft background noise from the TV. Claire had been in the study for hours, the door half shut, under the pretense of finishing a presentation for the board. I cleaned up dinner alone, washed her favorite wine glass even though she hadn't used it, and carried it upstairs, half on autopilot. I paused at the door, not knocking, just standing there, unnoticed, in the crack of shadow she left open, a bad habit she never shook, not when she was really focused. Except tonight, she wasn't focused. She was curled up in the armchair, knees tucked under her, phone pressed tight to her ear, her voice pitched low and syrupy sweet in a way she hadn't spoken to me in months. "I miss you already," she whispered, laughing softly. "Tonight was dangerous. You're such a bad influence on me." There was a pause, her fingers fiddling with the charm bracelet she always claimed was too juvenile to wear around me. And then she added, almost giddy, "I keep thinking about that little cabin you found. Just you, me, and no rules. God, I can't wait to disappear with you." The silence that followed was worse than anything she could have said. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the tone, the freedom, the reckless abandon she'd buried so deeply around me that I forgot she ever had it. She didn't sound like Claire, not the Claire I knew, the one who scheduled our vacation 6 months out and left packing checklists taped to the fridge. This was a woman unburdened, untethered, already gone. I didn't flinch. I didn't make a sound. I stood there with the wineglass still in my hand, cool and clean and useless, and I listened as she giggled and whispered promises about running away, about living some fantasy life that clearly had no place for me in it. She hung up a minute later, sighing happily, and for a moment I thought about walking in, about asking who she had just promised her future to, about why she looked lighter, younger, more alive now than she had when she kissed me goodbye that morning. But the part of me that still loved her, or thought it did, died cleanly and quietly right there in that doorway, and what remained was something colder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. I turned without a sound, leaving the wineglass on the hall table, and walked downstairs, every step deliberate, controlled. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat at the kitchen island, lit a cigarette I hadn't touched since college, and stared at the neat, curated rows of our life around me, the coordinated dish towels, the framed "home is where the heart is" photos she insisted on hanging even though they clashed with the modern decor. She thought she was clever. She thought she was careful. She thought she could juggle two lives forever and that I would be too blind, too trusting, too wrapped up in my role as the good, supportive husband to ever notice the theater she was staging around me. But the thing about theater is, eventually the set starts to crack, the paint peels, the lights flicker, and the audience realizes it's all just papier-mâché and glue. Claire had no idea I was no longer her audience. I wasn't there to clap politely when she took her bow. I was behind the curtains now, where all the ugly machinery lived, and I wasn't just suspicious anymore, I was operational. Strategic. A man with nothing left to lose but a thirst for the kind of justice she would never see coming. There would be no confrontation, no screaming matches, no messy emotional autopsies. No, I would leave her with exactly what she wanted, freedom. But I would hollow out everything she built to get it. I stubbed out the cigarette in the sink, wiped away the ash like it had never been there, and started planning. Because the woman upstairs, smiling into her pillow and dreaming about cabins and bad boys, wasn't my wife anymore. She was just collateral damage. And I would burn every dream she ever had down to the foundation, one perfect, silent match at a time. The trick was simple. Stop thinking like a husband. Start thinking like a predator. Claire still believed she was operating in the old world, the one where I asked no questions and accepted every half-truth she offered like it was gospel. She had no idea the rules had changed. I began small, patient, almost surgical. The next time she claimed she was working late, I sent a courier to her office, a bottle of champagne, a congratulations note, something just sweet and stupid enough that any receptionist would hand it over without second-guessing. I sat back and waited. 20 minutes later, I got the confirmation text. Delivery refused. Office closed at 5 p.m. Claire, however, didn't get home until 10:30, reeking of expensive whiskey and cheap excuses. I smiled as I listened to her story about emergency meetings and partners pulling rank, and I filed it all away, calmly, neatly, methodically. A week later, I created a burner account, male, generic, handsome in the bland, fitness trainer way women who wanted low-risk ego boosts adored. I followed her on Instagram, an account I hadn't even realized she switched to private 3 months earlier, and within hours, she accepted. She accepted. Just like that. Like a starving animal snapping at bait. The messages started almost immediately. Compliments. Emojis. Teasing questions about her adventurous side. She answered every one of them. Not full-throated flirting at first. No, Claire was far too careful for that. But the kind of coy, calculated replies that left the door open, all sugar and plausible deniability. She even sent a selfie, pouty lips, tousled hair, a glass of wine in hand. Taken, unmistakably, in the guest bathroom of our own house. I saved it. I saved everything. Meanwhile, I studied the bank statements. Not the obvious stuff, not the dinners, not the Uber rides she could pass off as business expenses. I drilled down into the little transactions she didn't think anyone would notice. Starbucks runs in neighborhoods she had no meetings scheduled in, Venmo payments to people I'd never heard of, a recurring Lyft charge every Thursday night like clockwork, coinciding perfectly with her late meetings. I charted it all, mapped it against the timeline of her lies, until her personal growth journey looked less like a woman finding herself and more like a tactical campaign to carve me out of her life. I didn't tail her. I tailed her best friend, Marcy, the one who always covered for her with breathless, clumsy stories that sounded like they were being made up as they were spoken. I started visiting the coffee shop Marcy checked into religiously on Saturdays, pretending to work on my laptop in the corner. I watched her meet Claire once, just once, all flustered and whispering urgently before handing Claire what looked like a manila envelope. Claire stuffed it into her tote bag like it was radioactive. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face blank, kept my breathing steady. I let them leave. I didn't need to confront anything, not yet. Instead, I went home, pulled the security footage from our front porch camera, the one Claire never remembered existed, and waited. Sure enough, there she was an hour later, striding up the walk, tote bag bulging. I was flicking nervously up and down the street before she unlocked the door and slipped inside, like a criminal returning to the scene of her own crime. I even started setting verbal traps, small and precise, watching her lie to my face with the same ease she used to say she loved me. How was Marcy's? I asked one evening, casual, stirring sauce at the stove. Oh, we never met up, she said, without missing a beat, pulling her earrings off and dropping them into the little ceramic tray by the door. She canceled last minute, work emergency. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I tasted the sauce, nodded thoughtfully, and filed that lie away too. By now, the truth was clear. Claire hadn't just slipped. She had sprinted headlong into betrayal with both arms wide open. And still, she moved through our house like it was her stage, reciting her lines, touching my shoulder as she passed, dropping pecks on my cheek, all the while believing the illusion was holding. She had no idea the hunter was already in the tree line, watching every step she took, waiting, plotting. It wasn't about catching her anymore. I had already caught her, wrapped up in her own cowardice and deceit. Now it was about precision, timing, letting her dig herself so deep that when the final blow came, there would be no escape, no salvage, no excuses. Only ruin, only silence, and the beautiful, devastating collapse of everything she ever thought she wanted. It was her promotion party that set the perfect stage, Claire's night of triumph, her night of becoming partner, the culmination of everything she had clawed and schemed her way toward for the last decade. Carmichael and Rowe rented out the rooftop bar of the most exclusive hotel in the city, all glass and marble and champagne towers, a place where appearances were currency and perception was everything. I wore the suit she picked out for me last Christmas, the one she said made me look like someone you can trust, and I smiled and shook hands and played the proud, supportive husband so perfectly it would have fooled God himself. I waited until after the speeches, after the obligatory hugs and polished applause, after she stood under the lights grinning like royalty, a glass of vintage Dom in one hand and her other hand conspicuously bare, no wedding ring. I caught that detail in an instant, filed it away like everything else, and kept smiling. When the party shifted to the after-hours lounge, more private, more intimate, I made my move. I booked the private room ahead of time, the one lined with leather couches and blackout curtains and a massive screen meant for executive presentations, and I told her it was a surprise celebration just for us, a little victory lap away from the noise. She came, of course she came, tipsy and giddy, practically floating on her own ego. She curled into the couch, laughing, glass in hand, telling me how proud she was of herself, how this was only the beginning. I smiled back, warm and adoring, and clicked the remote resting beside me. The screen blinked to life, casting a cold, sharp glow across the room, and there, 30 feet high, appeared the first image, Claire in a low-cut dress I'd never seen, sitting in the lap of Zachary Monroe in a shadowy bar, his hand slipping up her thigh with no pretense of subtlety. She stiffened immediately, the laughter dying in her throat, her body pulling back into itself like she could physically retreat from the image if she just moved fast enough. I let the pictures roll, hotel lobbies, car rides, rooftop embraces that mirrored the one she had given me in this very building years ago when we first dreamed about our future. She didn't speak at first, her mouth hanging slightly open, eyes flicking to me, to the door, to the screen, back to me, trapped. Finally, she choked out the oldest, most pathetic line in the world. It's not what you think. I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I simply tilted my head slightly, studying her like a new species, waiting. She scrambled for footing. We were just talking, she said, voice brittle, the kind of lie so thin you could see it shatter as it left her lips. Another photo appeared, her straddling him in the front seat of his car, hair a mess, her laugh frozen in grainy betrayal. Her face crumpled for a second before hardening again, slipping into another script. It was a mistake, she said, desperate now, like she could still steer the wreckage into something salvageable. It didn't mean anything. You and I, we've been so distant. She reached for me then, hand trembling slightly, her eyes wide with manufactured regret, and that's when I finally spoke. voice low and precise. You didn't make a mistake, I said, each word as clean as a scalpel. You made a series of decisions. She recoiled like I'd slapped her, color draining from her face. She tried another tactic, anger blooming now to cover the fear. You never paid attention to me, she snapped, her voice rising just a little, the first crack in her mask. You were so obsessed with being supportive, you didn't even see what I needed. I let her speak. I let her drown in her own pathetic flailing, every word another nail she hammered into her own coffin. When she saw she wasn't getting any reaction from me, no anger, no pleading, no weakness, she shifted again, a sneer curling her lips. You think you're so smart, she hissed, leaning back like a queen dismissing a peasant. You think you've won something? You're pathetic. You're boring. I outgrew you years ago. Her words hit the air like acid, daring me to explode, to break. But I didn't even blink. I smiled. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a slim black folder, setting it gently on the table between us. Inside, notarized copies of my petition for divorce, the cancellation confirmation for our joint lease, the updated title for the car she drove, now solely in my name, and the notice of withdrawal of her name from our shared accounts. Every escape route, every resource she thought she could crawl back to, gone. Her mouth opened again, but no sound came out. The fear was raw now, primal, rising fast behind her eyes as she realized she wasn't in control, hadn't been for some time. I leaned forward just enough so she could hear the final cut when it came, soft and absolute. You're not the woman I married. You're not even a good liar. The silence after that was thick enough to drown in, a heavy, choking thing that wrapped around both of us as the screen continued to cycle through her betrayals, lighting the room in flickering shades of her downfall. And I stayed right there, across from her, watching the final pieces of her perfect little world splinter apart, making no move to leave. Not yet. Let her sit in it. Let her feel it. Let her know. At first, she just sat there, stunned and breathing in these short, ragged little gasps like someone who had been punched hard in the ribs, her body folding in on itself, her hand clutching the edge of the table like it might somehow save her from drowning. But the silence, the cold, heavy finality of it, started to unspool something inside her, something frantic and ugly that she could no longer control. You smothered me, she snapped suddenly, her voice slicing through the room like a broken bottle, all jagged edges and desperate fury. You always needed me to be perfect, didn't you? Your little trophy wife, your support system, your goddamn safety net. Maybe if you weren't so boring, so predictable, this wouldn't have happened. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I simply watched her, the way you might watch a fire burn down a house you no longer lived in, detached and quietly fascinated by the destruction. You didn't outgrow me, I said calmly, my voice a scalpel against her hysteria. You decayed. She flinched hard at that, eyes wild, mouth opening and closing like a fish tossed onto dry land. She scrambled for a new tactic, a new angle of attack, grabbing whatever emotional weapon she thought might still work. You're not even angry, she spat, a mocking laugh breaking free, brittle and ugly. You're not a real man. A real man would fight for me. A real man would have made me feel alive again. She wanted a reaction. She needed it, like a drug. But I gave her nothing but the hollow, empty mirror of her own failure. A real woman, I said, low and precise, wouldn't need saving from her own emptiness. That one struck deep. I saw it, the way her face twitched, the way her nails dug into the leather armrest until her knuckles turned white. She shifted again, flailing now, trying to recast herself as the wounded party, the victim in a tragedy she wrote with her own hand. Her voice trembled with fake sorrow, her eyes glassy with manufactured tears. I made mistakes, okay? I'm only human. We both made mistakes. You can't throw away everything we built over one mistake. She reached for me then, hand outstretched, shaking, but I leaned back slightly, not in fear or disgust, but in the effortless way you avoid a falling branch you already knew was rotten. You didn't just burn the bridge, I said, my tone still cool and terrifyingly even. You salted the ground. Her mouth twisted in rage and despair, her words tumbling out faster now, less coherent, more primal. I loved you, she screamed, fists clenched at her sides. I gave you everything. I stayed when I could have left years ago, when you stopped being enough. I let the accusation hang there, let her think it had power, let her think it still meant something. Then, in a voice so calm it barely seemed human, I answered, you stayed because you needed a fallback plan. A comfortable failure to land on when the thrill wore off. She recoiled like she had been slapped, real tears in her eyes now, the ugly, bitter kind that come not from remorse but from the realization that she had lost, completely and irrevocably. She tried one last time, a hoarse whisper leaking out like a punctured tire. "You can't just walk away from this," she said, voice breaking. "You can't pretend it didn't matter." I smiled then, a slow, quiet thing that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with the absolute annihilation of any hold she thought she had left. "It didn't matter," I said, final and merciless. "Not anymore." Her breath hitched, a soft, pathetic sound, and for the first time since I had started this whole cold, clinical demolition of her lies, she looked truly afraid, not of what I would do, but of what I had already done. I had stripped away the illusion, torn down the fantasy where she could still be the heroine of her own story, the wronged wife, the misunderstood soul. I had left her with the one thing she couldn't survive, herself. She stood there, trembling, the weight of her own failure pressing down on her until her once proud posture crumbled into something small and broken. But I didn't move to comfort her, didn't offer her a lifeline. I just watched as she realized there would be no screaming match she could win, no big scene where she could twist herself into the victim, no second chance to rewrite the narrative. There was only the cold, brutal reality that I no longer cared, that my love, my anger, my very attention had been withdrawn like a banker closing a vault after a theft. She had gambled everything on the assumption that I would always be there to forgive, to chase, to beg, and when she saw the truth, that I was already gone, her shoulders sagged, her head bowed, and the last flicker of defiance guttered out of her like a dying flame. The room pulsed with the raw, unbearable silence of a kingdom fallen to ruins, and still, I sat there, silent, watching her drown in it, offering not even the mercy of a goodbye. By the time Claire sat in that private room sobbing into her trembling hands, her fate had already been sealed. She just didn't know it yet. The very night I caught her whispering those sweet little betrayals into the phone, I had started laying the first bricks of her collapse. My first step was simple, methodical. I duplicated everything. Every message, every photo, every piece of evidence pulled from her Instagram DMs, burner accounts, the security camera footage, the bank statements, all neatly organized into labeled folders, stored on encrypted drives, a cloud server she didn't even know existed, and 3 separate flash drives locked in different locations. I made sure it would be impossible for her to claim innocence or even confusion once the hammer fell. While she slept, or rather, while she texted her little boy toy under the covers, I systematically locked down every joint account we shared, removing her access, transferring balances into accounts solely in my name, leaving just enough in the checking account to avoid suspicion until the final play. I canceled the credit cards she used most often, reported them as lost so the banks would automatically deactivate them without needing an explanation, leaving her to find out the hard way when she tried to use them. The car she loved so much, the sleek black SUV she flaunted as a sign of her success, was leased under my name, a detail she forgot in her arrogance, and a quick visit to the dealership allowed me to terminate the lease and arrange for its repossession without a whisper of warning. I timed it perfectly. The repo man would show up at her office right after lunch the following week, just when she would have the maximum number of colleagues watching. While I worked the financials in silence, I began the slow, deliberate destruction of her professional life. I didn't need to shout about her affair from the rooftops. I just needed to send the right documents to the right people. Claire's promotion depended heavily on her moral integrity clause, a detail most didn't know existed, but that her firm took very seriously. I drafted a clean, clinical email with the attached images and conversation transcripts, addressed anonymously to the board of Carmichael and Rowe, timing it to land in their inboxes the morning after her celebratory weekend. No accusations. No anger. Just undeniable proof of conduct unbecoming of a partner. By the time she realized something was wrong, they would have already convened an emergency review. I didn't stop there. I reached out to her parents, not with rage, not with pleas for them to talk sense into her, but with a neat, unemotional package, the emails, the timeline, the evidence. No commentary. Just the truth, laid bare. Her father, an old-school, honor-obsessed man who once told me over whiskey that a real marriage is a sacred bond, would take one look and cut her off without hesitation. Her mother, so obsessed with appearances, would treat her like a walking embarrassment. Friends? The ones she leaned on for her new, liberated lifestyle? I didn't need to touch them. I knew the moment the scandal hit her job and her family, they would scatter like rats from a sinking ship. Meanwhile, the divorce papers, filed quietly, with every damaging piece of evidence attached, were already sitting with the best shark of a lawyer I could afford, served to her at work by a man who wouldn't even bother to smile. Custody wasn't a fight, no kids, thank God. But the financial division would be brutal and final. She would walk away with nothing that bore my name. Every asset, every investment, every shred of the life she built with my money and my loyalty would be stripped from her so cleanly that even the courts would be left nodding in satisfaction. And the final touch, the masterpiece of it all, was the cabin. The little escape she had dreamed of sharing with her lover, a place she thought she could vanish into. Turns out, it wasn't just a fantasy. In one of her carelessly saved texts, she had given the address, a tiny rental in a remote town, booked under her name. I drove out there 2 nights before everything detonated, met with the landlord, and bought the place outright, cash. Ownership transferred immediately. When she finally tried to flee there, to lick her wounds and rebuild whatever pathetic fairy tale she thought she had, she would find herself locked out, the locks changed, the property posted with private property, no trespassing signs bearing my full legal rights. She thought she was running toward freedom. She was running straight into a brick wall. Claire still floated through her days, smiling, clueless, congratulating herself for how cleanly she thought she'd gotten away with it. She thought she had all the time in the world to maneuver, to manipulate, to spin her betrayal into a redemption arc. She had no idea that every move she made was on a chessboard I already owned, and that checkmate was only days away. Every smile she gave to the world was another nail in her coffin. Every lie she told herself another inch of rope she wrapped tighter around her own neck. And I would be there, not with rage or violence or cruelty, but with cold, surgical inevitability, the architect of the life she would watch crumble beneath her feet. It happened faster than even I expected, though in hindsight, Claire's world was so precariously built on lies and stolen moments that all it needed was one small push to send the whole thing crashing down. The firm called an emergency ethics review meeting on a Monday morning, early enough to catch everyone off guard, scheduled suspiciously close to the time her name was supposed to be announced in front of the board. Claire walked into the conference room like she owned the building, hair perfect, heels sharp against the marble floor, the picture of triumph. I was already there, seated silently at the far end of the room, a silent witness in a dark suit, nodding politely as the partners filed in, eyes flickering toward me with a mix of curiosity and something colder. Claire's smile faltered slightly when she saw me, confusion crinkling her forehead, but she pushed forward, flashing her 1,000-watt grin like she could force the room to bend to her will. She didn't notice the envelope waiting for her at her seat until she was already sitting down. She didn't notice the stiff tension, the way no one met her eyes, the way even her old mentor Mr. Carmichael wouldn't return her polite greetings. She opened the envelope, and for a moment she genuinely didn't seem to understand what she was looking at, the photos, the screenshots, the timeline printed in brutal black and white. Then her hands started to shake. She tried to laugh it off, at first, a breathy little chuckle that cracked audibly halfway through. This is a misunderstanding, she said, voice higher than usual, eyes darting around the room searching for someone, anyone, to save her. No one moved. No one spoke. Mr. Carmichael cleared his throat and simply said, "We'll need your resignation by noon." Claire's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, the color draining from her face, and that's when the second blow hit, her phone, buzzing violently against the table, lighting up with message after message from her family group chat. She grabbed it like a drowning woman grabbing a lifeline, swiping desperately, and I watched, savoring the exact moment she realized her parents had seen everything too. Her father's final message sat there at the bottom of the thread, "You are no daughter of mine." She made a small broken noise in the back of her throat and dropped the phone like it had burned her. Across the room, I caught the eyes of Marcy, her best friend, her one-time alibi, standing against the wall, arms folded, face hard. She looked at Claire like she was seeing her for the first time, and she didn't offer her the smallest nod of support. Claire tried to speak again, tried to gather the shattered pieces of her composure, but the door swung open before she could even finish her stammered protest. And there he was, Zachary Monroe, her little pet project, her escape fantasy, standing awkwardly in the doorway, looking pale and sick, flanked by 2 senior HR reps. He wouldn't meet her eyes, wouldn't move toward her. wouldn't even acknowledge her. Someone had sent him copies of the evidence too, along with the firm's dating policies, the clear conflict of interest violations, the very real possibility of being blacklisted from the entire industry before his career even started. He didn't say a word, just turned and walked away without looking back, leaving Claire standing there, half risen from her chair, hand outstretched, abandoned like a fool in front of everyone she thought she controlled. She still tried God, she still tried to salvage it. She pasted a trembling smile on her face, turned to Mr. Carmichael and said, "This is all just a terrible mistake. I can explain. Please, if you just give me a chance to." But her voice cracked halfway through the plea, and she finally heard it, heard the raw pity in the room, not respect, not even anger, just pity. The room was no longer hers. The world she had built was gone. She looked at me then, across the polished conference table, really looked at me for the first time in weeks, and saw nothing. No rage, no forgiveness, no weakness, just a calm, impenetrable silence that said everything louder than words ever could. Her eyes widened slightly, mouth trembling as if she might still try to beg, to crawl, to promise she could fix this if I would just give her a script to follow. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched her collapse under the weight of her own choices, watched her mask shatter piece by piece until there was nothing left but a woman broken by the empire she tried to steal. She stumbled backward a step, then another, until she hit the wall, shoulders sagging, breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. I stayed and made sure she saw me watch her fall, made sure the last thing she remembered from the life she destroyed was the man she thought was too boring, too safe, too predictable, standing over her ruins with not a shred of mercy left to offer. And still, I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Everything she ever wanted had just turned to ash in her hands, and I was the one who had given her the match. It happened in the hotel lobby an hour after the meeting, where Claire had been officially stripped of her partnership and quietly asked to resign, in the best interests of the firm's reputation. I stood near the bar, watching her pace like a trapped animal, hands fluttering to her hair, her phone, her bag, trying to piece together a way to undo what could no longer be undone. Her parents arrived first, stiff and furious, her mother's mouth pressed into a bloodless line, her father's face red and tight with barely contained disgust. Behind them, a few coworkers trickled in, curious after hearing the rumors swirl upstairs, and finally, like the last ugly piece of a sad puzzle, Zachary slunk through the glass doors, looking like he wanted to turn around and run the second he saw her. She spotted me first. She stormed across the marble floor, her heels clicking sharply, her face twisted into something between rage and desperation. "You did this," she shrieked, loud enough to turn heads across the lobby. "You vindictive, small little man. You think you can ruin me? You think you're better than me?" Her voice cracked on the last word, hysteria bleeding through, but I didn't flinch. I let the words hit me like paper darts, meaningless and hollow. "No, Claire," I said, my voice cutting clean through the growing buzz of the lobby. "You ruined yourself." I just made sure everyone else finally saw it. A ripple went through the crowd. Whispers, glances, a woman near the bar pressing a hand to her mouth. Claire's parents stepped forward then, her father pointing a trembling finger at her, his voice like thunder. "You humiliated all of us," he barked. "You spat on everything we gave you." Claire turned to him, tears brimming, hands pleading. "Dad, please, it wasn't like that. He's twisting everything." She pointed at me again, wild-eyed, but no one was listening to her anymore. I took a step forward, my presence alone silencing the entire lobby. "Twisting," I said, voice low and lethal. "Was it me who took off your wedding ring before slipping into hotel rooms with a junior associate? Was it me who lied, over and over, while smiling in my face like it was a game?" Her lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse right there. But she rallied, or tried to, clenching her fists and hissing through her teeth. "You were boring. You never saw me. You wanted a maid, not a wife." Laughter bubbled from somewhere in the crowd, sharp and merciless. Someone muttered, "Classy," just loud enough for her to hear. Claire swung around, trying to pin the shame on someone, anyone else. She turned her fury onto Zachary next, stalking toward him, jabbing a finger into his chest. Tell them we had something real. Tell them this wasn't just." But Zachary backed away, hands up, face pale as milk. I didn't know she was married at first," he stammered, and the last shred of dignity Claire had clung to disintegrated before our eyes. Her voice hitched into a half-sob, half-scream. "You're all cowards. You're all pathetic. I built everything. You're nothing without me." She whirled on me again, breathing hard, mascara bleeding into the fine cracks of her once perfect face. "You'll regret this. You'll wake up and realize you destroyed the only person who ever truly loved you." I walked up to her then, close enough that she could see the complete absence of fear, of love, of anything left in my eyes. I bent slightly, so only she could hear me when I said, "You never loved me. You loved that I loved you. There's a difference, and it's why you'll end up alone." Her face crumpled like paper, and the first real sob escaped her throat, ugly and raw. Her mother turned away in disgust, her father shaking his head slowly like he couldn't even stand to look at her. Cameras flashed from the side. Someone had started filming, capturing every second of her downfall in brutal, digital permanence. Claire dropped to her knees without grace, clutching at her purse, her phone, the scraps of her shattered pride, but no one moved to help her. The entire lobby had turned into a silent jury, watching her self-destruction with cold fascination. I straightened, adjusted my jacket, and turned away without a single backward glance. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to stay and argue or plead or fight. I had already won. She knew it. Everyone knew it. And as I walked out of that lobby, the last sound I heard was Claire's broken voice crying after me, a sound so hollow and pathetic it barely even registered. I stepped into the sunlight, the heavy doors closing behind me with a satisfying finality, leaving her crumpled on the floor, surrounded by all the witnesses she thought would always be on her side. Let her explain her way out of that. Let her claw at the ruins she made with her own hands. I wasn't her safety net anymore. I was her reckoning. Claire's fall wasn't dramatic the way she always imagined her life would be. No tearful movie montage or noble redemption arc. It was slow, grinding, and ugly, the kind of collapse that strips a person of their last scraps of dignity until they don't even recognize themselves in the mirror. Within 48 hours of her resignation, word spread through the firm like wildfire, not just about her affair, but about how sloppily, how pathetically she had gambled everything and lost. Clients requested to be reassigned. The partners refused to speak her name, and the whispers followed her out of the building, down the street, into every polished office she tried to crawl into afterward. Offers dried up like a drought, and soon enough, her once blazing LinkedIn profile quietly deactivated, her Instagram locked down, her Facebook wiped clean as if deleting the evidence of her existence could erase the shame. Friends she thought were loyal unfollowed her in waves, not out of outrage, but out of indifference. No one wants to be associated with a sinking ship. Marcy, her former best friend, ghosted her so coldly that Claire showed up at her doorstep one night and was left pounding on the door in the rain until the neighbors called security. Even Zachary, the boy she had risked it all for, evaporated the moment it became clear there was no cushy future to step into, no prestigious firm, no glamorous life, just the wreckage of a woman who mistook lust for love and ambition for invincibility. I heard, through the occasional rumor that floated back to me like smoke from a distant fire, that Claire packed what little pride she had left into 2 suitcases and moved 3 states over to a nowhere town where nobody knew her name. Working the front desk at a low-end office supply company, her dreams of breaking glass ceilings and being a legend reduced to scanning cheap ink cartridges for bored customers who wouldn't even meet her eyes. But broken people don't know when to stay gone, and 3 months after everything ended, my phone buzzed with her name lighting up the screen, a name that now felt foreign and irrelevant, like graffiti on an abandoned building. I let it ring. Then another text. "I still love you. I realize it now. We can fix this." I stared at the screen, not with anger or pain, but with a detached, clinical pity, like someone observing a wounded animal struggling to stand. I could have ignored her. I almost did. But something in me, something that demanded closure, picked up the phone and typed 5 simple words that ended it forever. Strange. "I don't remember you." I never heard from her again after that. No more messages. No more calls. No more desperate, teary voicemails where she sobbed that she made a mistake, that she wasn't thinking, that she wasn't herself. She vanished the way all broken liars eventually do, slipping beneath the surface of the life she destroyed, invisible and forgotten. I stood taller now, lighter, my life no longer weighed down by the rot she had buried in it. And to everyone who listened to this story, thank you. Tell me, where are you from? And did you enjoy watching the mask finally fall?